We finished in part 1 of this series with a focus on the 64th condemned proposition by St. Pius X in Lamentabili Sane. While many Catholics may be aware of these 65 condemnations, fewer know that the main catalyst for this syllabus, along with the landmark encyclical Pascendi, was the popular French priest Father Alfred Loisy. Many were being led by the modernist spirit, seeking to free the scriptures from their supposed error, exposed by the latest interpretations of discoveries in geology and archaeology. However, this priest led the charge, which reveals that the heart of modernism is a disdain for the historicity of Holy Writ, especially Genesis. Before being excommunicated in 1908, Father Loisy listed 5 propositions that summed up his biblical criticism. Here are 3 of those 5 propositions. 1. Denial of the Mosaic authorship of the Pentateuch. 2. The denial of the first 5 chapters of Genesis as literal history. 3. That as regards natural science, the scriptures do not rise above the opinions of the time in which the books were composed. Demonstrating this focus of disregarding the literalness of Genesis, Father Loisy wrote in 1892,
"Someday it will be a matter for astonishment, at least so I should hope, that a Catholic university professor was adjudged a dangerous character for having said, in the year of grace, 1892, that the narratives of the first chapters of Genesis are not to be taken as literal history, and that the pretended agreement of the Bible with natural science is a rather poor joke."
Well, it is no joking matter for the Catholic of goodwill to notice that St. Pius X is citing protection of not only Catholic dogma, formerly defined doctrine, but also Catholic doctrine. In other words, the supposed progress of the sciences cannot be used as a pretext even for the change of Catholic teaching or doctrine that has not been formally defined, but has the universal teaching of the fathers and doctors through the centuries. And St. Pius X has of all areas of doctrinal focus, creation. Even though the faithful have over 1,900 years of continual and constant teaching by the Church on creation, so-called scientific progress is reason enough for certain elements within the Church to demand a change in her interpretation. Thankfully, this anti-Catholic approach is condemned by Pope St. Pius X. Therefore, even when doctrine is not formally defined, popes, bishops, theologians, and others cannot change the direction of the Church's interpretation pertaining to doctrine, with centuries and even millennia of consistent interpretation. Before the Catholic Church formally defined the dogmatic teachings of the real presence of Christ in the Eucharist in 1215, and even more fully and precisely in 1551, what Catholic would deny the real presence? The temerity to deny the real presence before the formal definition is similar to the temerity to deny the creation doctrines of Holy Mother Church. This internal protection is not the only defense provided by the Church. There is also external protection, whereby the Church reserves the right to judge and condemn the assertions of other sciences, such as geology and astronomy, when they overstep their bounds and assert erroneous interpretations contrary to the Church's interpretation of revealed truth. This reality, unknown to many Catholics, is confirmed by 2 well-known Catholic saints writing upon this safeguard that theology can wield when the lower sciences try to rise out of their domain. St. Thomas states in his Summa Theologica,
"The principles of other sciences either are evident and cannot be proved, or are proved by natural reason through some other science. But the knowledge proper to this science comes through revelation and not through natural reason. Therefore, it has no concern to prove the principles of other sciences, but only to judge of them. Whatsoever is found in other sciences contrary to any truth of this science must be condemned as false."
Some Catholics may make the rebuttal that Aquinas was writing in the 13th century, and as such updating is needed since much has changed. However, in the 20th century, Pope St. Pius X reiterated this teaching of St. Thomas. This holy pope condemns the following in statement number 5 of Lamentabili Sane.
"Since the deposit of faith contains only revealed truths, the Church has no right to pass judgment on the assertions of the human sciences."
Putting this into the positive, yes, the deposit of faith contains truths revealed by God Himself, giving the Church the right to pass judgment on contrary assertions made by the human sciences. With St. Thomas Aquinas and Pope St. Pius X guarding the flanks of the average Catholic and the deposit of Church doctrine, let us now read the Church's protection in a dogmatic decree in Vatican Council I.
"If anyone says that human studies are to be treated with such a degree of liberty that their assertions may be maintained as true, even when they are opposed to divine revelation, and that they may not be forbidden by the Church, let him be anathema."
We now turn to the words of Father Fenton, who for about 20 years was the editor of American Ecclesiastical Review. By reason of its character as wisdom and as the supreme science within the attainment of man, sacred theology can and must judge about the principles and the conclusions put forward in other branches of learning. It is the business of sacred theology to examine the teachings set forth in the name of these purely natural sciences, and to point out and correct any statement in opposition to revealed truth. Thus, sacred theology is able to say with perfect certitude that a statement denying the fact of creation, and put forward under the heading of biology or of geology, is utterly false. In the formation of this judgment, sacred theology makes use only of those resources which constitute its essential equipment. It has no need of the apparatus which is proper to the physical sciences themselves. The statement which is criticized by sacred theology is evidently false insofar as it contradicts the manifest content of divine revelation. It would be absolutely incorrect to assert that sacred theology has or claims the power to deny scientific facts. There never has been, and there never will be, a truth enunciated by any inferior science which contradicts the actual content of sacred theology. The statement contradictory to the principles of theology and set forth in the name of another science is either a groundless hypothesis or a crass misinterpretation of a fact. An example of groundless hypotheses are the assertions made in the name of the science of cosmology. Let us read what two well-known evolutionists say regarding this science. The first comes from Nobel Prize-winning astrophysicist John Mather. He states,
"We have no direct evidence of how galaxies were formed, how the first stars formed without the help of the prior generations of stars, how galaxies evolved, whether they were formed from aggregations of smaller units or from subdivisions of larger ones. Everything happened in the cosmic dark age. It goes right to the heart of the question of how we got here."
And further, James Gunn, an astronomer at Princeton University, states,
Cosmology may look like a science, but it isn't a science. A basic tenet of science is that you can do repeatable experiments, and you can't do that in cosmology.
The originator of the framework for the Big Bang, Catholic scientist Father George Lemaitre, could not agree more with these great minds, that the statements put out by so many cosmologists are assumption-based, and the conclusions then formed from these unscientific assumptions are in fact contrary to divine revelation. Unknown to many is that Father George Lemaitre knew perfectly well that his Big Bang hypothesis, or primeval Adam as it was known then, was truly the antithesis of the God-revealed account of creation. The evolutionist Father George Lemaitre states,
"The hypothesis of the primeval Adam is the antithesis of the supernatural creation of the world."
This writing of Father Fenton from 1941 reminds Catholics to reject groundless hypotheses put forth under the name of natural sciences that reject principles of theology, including that of the sacred historical character of divine revelation. Onward to a demonstration of Father Fenton's usage of a crass misinterpretation of a fact with respect to a philosophical assumption under the heading of natural science that undermines sacred history. The gradualist and uniformitarian geologists assume a uniform rate of erosion, for to them, the present is the key to the past. The depth of this canyon at over 120 feet and its extensive length would take many millions of years to form, according to uniformitarian geological interpretation. However, because the canyon was formed in 1926 as the result of engineers diverting water in a canal, we know by actual observation this canyon was formed in about 140 hours. How many would look at formations such as the Grand Canyon and others throughout the world and estimate hundreds of millions of years for such erosion? To use the words of Father Fenton, we can say, with perfect certitude, that a statement denying the fact of creation and put forward under the heading of geology is utterly false. The philosophical assumptions that allow for individuals to continually assess values of millions of years, undermining the sacred history of God's revelation, are simply a crass misinterpretation of a fact. As we finish, we have Father Fenton in the 20th century reminding us that man can misinterpret discoveries made in the natural sciences, mentioning specifically geology. This misinterpretation of facts and discoveries made in crass or ridiculous ways is not how man should perform in his capacity as a natural scientist in the world. Advice from the saintly, liturgical, and intellectual giant of the 19th century, Dom Guéranger, would prevent many thousands and thousands of blunders in interpretation if only it were heeded. Dom Guéranger writes,
"History must therefore be Christian if it wants to be true. For Christianity is the complete truth. Every historical framework that sets aside the supernatural order in its exposition and appreciation of the facts is a false framework. It has not been sufficiently noted that the Christian religion created the true science of history by giving it the Bible for its base. No one can deny this today.
The Bible is not a textbook on the natural sciences, a point about which progressive evolutionists are always quick to remind those Catholics following traditional doctrine. The Bible is, of course, not a science textbook, but its historical exposition is flawless. It is completely erroneous to state that Catholics who claim, in union with the fathers and doctors of the Church, that the account in the first chapters of Genesis aligns with reality are attempting a scientific explanation, claiming that these chapters of God's Word are inundated with a multitude of natural scientific facts. There is no such systematic coverage of any natural science in any book of Holy Writ. However, Catholics adhering to the traditional church teachings on these books know that the Fathers, Doctors, and Catholic catechisms of Holy Mother Church, even into the 20th century, adhere to the Church's perennial interpretation of Genesis, because it is real history, in fact, sacred history. The supposed progress of man's interpretation in the fields of geology and astronomy as they toss and turn, ever in new directions of supposed reality, is the reason Pope St. Pius X in his encyclical Pascendi wrote the following about Catholics and non-Catholics alike who scoff at the Church's traditional interpretation of Genesis and the Pentateuch.
Blind they are, and leaders of the blind, puffed up with the proud name of science. They have reached the pitch of folly at which they pervert the eternal concept of truth and the true meaning of religion. The modernists have no hesitation in affirming generally that these books, and especially the Pentateuch, have been gradually formed from a primitive, brief narration or allegorical interpretations.
This is a good reminder for those who see in modernism only liturgical novelty and moral degradation. For at the heart of modernism, and among the chief of their doctrines, is that of evolution.